My name is Kate Rubin. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the organizing director at B Seattle. Tonight's Building Tenant Power workshop is the power of newsletters. We are joined by our special guest presenter, Sonatina Sanchez. I'm going to start us off with a land acknowledgement. We are on the land of the Coast Salish peoples. I would like to recognize that we are occupying the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people, past and present, and honor with gratitude the land itself and the Duwamish tribe. As we do this important work on these lands, we understand that our collective liberation cannot happen without Indigenous sovereignty. We encourage each of you to sign the petition for federal recognition of the Duwamish tribe, and if you're able, visit the Longhouse and pay rent to the Duwamish. You can learn more from Real Rent Duwamish. We'll include a link for them in the resource guide that will be sent after the presentation. Our resource guide also contains contact information for the Renting in Seattle helpline, the Seattle Department of Construction and Inspections, also known as SDCI. They're responsible for enforcing landlord-tenant laws, the Seattle Office for Civil Rights, as well as a bunch of other organizations that provide services to renters. We encourage you to get more involved with B Seattle. We are seeking table volunteers, people to flyer, and folks interested in developing their skills as part of a tenant leadership team. We host 2 renter council meetings every month: the Elder Renter Council, which centers renters age 55 plus, and the Seattle Renter Organizing Council. These councils were created for renters to work together to strategize and fight for renter protections that they feel are important to their communities, give and receive peer-to-peer support for folks organizing in their building, grow renter power, and build community. We'll drop links to sign up for the email lists in the chat. So before we begin the workshop, here's some upcoming events that we'd like to share with you. Thursday, March 23rd, 5:30 to 7 p.m. at LGBTQ Allyship. There's a renters' rights and advocacy training. It'll be hosted by Allyship and the Tenant Law Center. Come and learn the steps you can take to support and protect renters' rights in Seattle. Friday, March 24th at 7:30 p.m., Poor Magazine, a poor and indigenous-led arts and media organization from Oakland, California, will be in Seattle to spread their radical love, work, and make connections needed to bring homefulness to the Pacific Northwest. Join them at Left Bank Books at 92 Pike Street for a showing of When Me and Mama Lived Outside, an award-winning short film by Peter Mancini, followed by a question and answer session. The film is based on the children's book of the same name, written by Tiny Gray Garcia, and focuses on one family's journey through homelessness. Visit their website for more information. The application is live for the Seattle Social Housing Public Development, PDA, board. Do you have a passion to see social housing succeed in Seattle? We sure do. Applications are open for the inaugural Seattle Social Housing Public Developer Authority Board. There are 7 open positions to be filled with renters at multiple income levels. Per the terms of the initiative, the board members will be appointed by the Seattle Renters Commission and shall include at least 1 member who has experienced housing insecurity, at least 1 member who has experienced financial eviction, and at least 1 member who has been displaced. We'll drop the link to submit your application in the chat. The deadline to apply is Friday, March 31st, 11:59 p.m. And then Friday, April 7th, it's the Sustainability and Renters' Rights Committee meeting. So please make comment in support of capping late fees at $10. There's currently no Seattle regulation preventing landlords from charging obscenely high late fees, often $200 or greater. Some landlords have even started imposing an extra charge for just delivering a late fee notice or other type of notice to tenants. These punitive and excessive late fees and notice delivery fees threaten tenants' ongoing ability to stay housed. There's no counterbalance to this. Tenants can't find their landlord if the landlord is late in making repairs. So they'll be voting on legislation limiting the amount of fees charged for late payment on rent. The landlords and their lobbyists are expected to show up in opposition. So in order to make public comment as impactful as possible, we're encouraging folks to come and show up in person. So we'll meet in the lobby of City Hall at 9 a.m. And then we can give public comment at the 9:30 meeting. If you can't make it to City Hall, but you can still give comment, you can do it remotely. So you'll sign up at 7:30 a.m. to speak at the 9:30 meeting. There's also a link that will drop in the chat where you can send an email to City Council urging them to cap the late fees. And then Wednesday, April 12th, 3 to 4:45 p.m. It's Solid Ground's Rent Smart webinar, Breaking a Lease. Do you need to break your lease to escape a dangerous situation? In this webinar, Solid Ground will discuss 3 situations where you may be able to break a lease without liability, including you've experienced stalking, unlawful harassment, domestic violence, or sexual assault. You've been assaulted by another tenant who was then arrested, or your landlord hasn't responded to a serious repair issue in a reasonable amount of time. They'll also discuss what to expect when breaking a lease in other circumstances. Thursday, April 13th, 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. at El Centro de la Raza in room 311. That's the Roberto Maestras Digital Literacy Lab, or online via Zoom. It's the next meeting of the Seattle Renter Organizing Council. Be Seattle and the Tenants Union of Washington host the Renter Organizing Council for Seattle renters to work together. I talked about it earlier, and this is a really great way to get involved and meet your fellow renters. And dinner is provided for in-person attendees. So we'll drop a link to RSVP in the chat. And then Wednesday, April 19th from 12:30 to 2:30 p.m. It's normally held at the Capitol Hill Library, but we just got an email that the room is not available. So we are trying to figure out if we want to meet somewhere else in the area or just do it online, but we'll be in touch. It's the Elder Renter Council meeting. And we usually provide snacks and beverages for that meeting as well. And then May 6th, it's Neighbor Day. The Seattle Department of Neighborhoods is collecting community nominations to honor people, businesses, and organizations who have gone the extra mile to support their neighbors. So if you have a neighbor that you would like to nominate, we'll put the link for that in the chat. And now that's my whole spiel. And so I am going to introduce our special guest presenter, Sanatina Sanchez. Sanatina is the resident representative on the board of directors at one of Seattle's affordable housing nonprofits, Community Roots Housing. CRH manages over 40 properties across the city, most of which are in Capitol Hill. Sanatina is the founder of Crafting Sound Meaning and works as a communications specialist, using her professional training and lived experiences to bring intersectional perspectives to reach those like her who hold multiple marginalized identities. As an autistic child of autistic parents, being able to interpret mainstream society and how to thrive in it has been a lifelong journey. Sanatina has been a resident of Community Roots Housing for over a decade. She also currently sits on the board of League of Women Voters of Seattle King County as the membership chair. She's active in the Transit Riders Union, Puget Sound Tenants Union, and mutual aid groups serving those in her neighborhood who've been marginalized from society. Thank you so much for being here, Sanatina. Take it away.
Hello, thank you. And I apologize for the washed outness of my appearance to start. The sun is going to be like fading just in like 5 minutes past the building, and I shall have good lighting again. But yes, yay, spring! We have the sun. I can't be mad at it. It's like the sun. So yes, thank you everybody for coming and watching and being a part of this presentation, The Power of Tenant Newsletters for Organizing, or just Power of Newsletters, you know. So let's get into the presentation. Let me go ahead and pull that up and start presenting. All righty. I was like, I wasn't sure when when Kate's part was going to be done, so I was like, okay, so there we go. Oh, I haven't shared to Zoom yet. That's my bad. Sorry. No. Okay. Can you see my screen? Yes, thank you. All right, power of tenant newsletters for organizing. So what are, let's get a little bit of intro. Uh, just to start off, tenant newsletters, powerful tool for organizing because they provide a platform for sharing news, updates, and important information. And they foster a sense of community, belonging amongst the people who live in a building for however long people happen to be there. Some people might think that this is a project for a long-term, or if you have to have a community that's been there for 10 plus years or something like that. But honestly, like a group of dorm residents on a floor often, sometimes put together a newsletter for their floor and be like, hey, what's going on with us this month? Or what are you up to? And stuff like that. And so it can be as big as a community in like a system, like Kate was saying, I sit on the resident, I sit as the resident board member on Community Roots Housing Public Development Authority. So many words. But and so we have a bunch of buildings in our system, and we have a newsletter that goes out given by the management. So the staff puts together a newsletter that goes out every month versus somebody like me who lives in one of the buildings. I decided during the early days of the pandemic to just put out a one letter paper to my neighbors in our one building once a month to keep us up to date on goings on of what's going on in our neighborhood. And so yeah, it can be big, small, all the way in between. What is a newsletter? Well, I kind of gave you a little bit of sample of the three examples that I just showed you, but basically the goal of all newsletters is to inform people about relevant information and news in an engaging way. And whether it's this resident tenant newsletter, whether it's a commercial newsletter you get in your email from, what am I thinking, North Face for some reason is popping in my head. They're great at their email marketing stuff, right? Newsletters are a way to inform people about a topic. And so as for a resident newsletter or a tenant newsletter, you can distribute them in many different ways. Paper distributed on doors, an email like a commercial newsletter. You can do it on a website. You can just have like a page, put up a blog spot. Those still exist. Yeah, I still have one. And or like a Discord group. That's another way to keep in touch. So a newsletter has connotations about like what you think, but the more you think about it, the more you can see that it really is just a way to inform your community. So depending on how many people are in your group, who's working on this project, a newsletter can look very different. And why? Why on earth would you want to do a tenant newsletter in your building? Well, many benefits. A little bullet point here. Keep tenants informed about building news and events. You encourage involvement in those events. This provides tenants a way to voice concerns on a regular basis and don't feel like they don't know where to go. And I mean, overall, right, encourages a sense of community. So we use this as a way to, let me see. Yes, well, the next slide is actually kind of like, these are the general benefits, and then these are the specific benefits when it comes to organizing. So the importance of tenant newsletters and organizing really comes down to 2 points, which is showing other residents, especially those who might be more timid and hesitant about getting involved in these kind of things, that there is an active community in the building or wherever the community that they're living in. And it doesn't have to be so political, right? So it's an easy way to connect to people without starting with, do you want to organize your building? And plus, also, in some cases, and this can be a good and a bad thing, there's always pros and cons when we're dealing with landlords and our property stuff right now. But like, if you have a good, well-organized group, this newsletter shows your landlord that there is an organized group of residents who know your rights, and it could either lessen their coming after you or potentially increase. So there's always potential negatives in all kinds of organizing work. So it's always important to look at your specific circumstances. And that's one of the things that the Seattle Renter Organizing Council, the Seattle Elder Council, Tenants Union of Washington, Puget Sound Tenants Union, all of these other groups are good at helping with. And so if you're thinking about a project like this, connecting with somebody, just having a chat and saying, hey, I saw this presentation, it's an idea I'm thinking about. Can you give me some advice based on my specific circumstances? That is a great way to get started on a project if you're not quite sure how to go about it. But yeah, it can also be a really good benefit to your landlord-tenant relationship, because if a landlord or management sees that you do know your rights, you are an active community, it can often make the step back a little bit from bothering you with extra, stuff that like the late fees and those kinds of things. Because I mean, the legal that's legal right now, but when things like that become laws, they're not often advertised very well. And so these kinds of newsletters are a great way to make sure that your neighbors are aware of things like the just-in-time legislation. Is that what it's called? And like the all kinds of things about tenant rights on a casual basis, on just like, hey, did you know that this was passed recently? You're not asking anybody to do anything about that, but it's letting their community be aware of it, whereas they might not have their finger on the pulse like you are watching this presentation. So how do you get started creating a apartment resident newsletter? Many ways. And we start with who is going to be doing it. So like I said earlier, newsletters can be from one person to a whole team, right? These three roles are the primary roles you're going to be wanting to separate amongst the tasks that you have going on, right? So content creator, editor, and designer. So content creator / writer and editor / writer, these two people are the ones who really put together the content, what people are reading, what people are getting, what information people are getting. And then the designer, if you have somebody who has that role separately, that's the person who's making sure it looks visually good, so that people are able to access the information better. And all three of these roles are very important. They can all be done by one person, all by three people, and each of these roles can even be split up further. So this is just the base as a way to get you started thinking about who in your building, who in your community might want to be a part of this group, and what skills might they be able to share. Next thing, define your goals. So as I said earlier, the goal of all newsletters is about information. But here we get into the nitty-gritty of what information are you interested in sharing? Are you going to be doing promoting events in the neighborhood or just in your building? Are you going to be doing personal news? Are you going to be trying to inform people about each other? Or are you just going to stick to events or non-personal details? Do you want to organize initiatives through the newsletter? Or do you want to tell people that if there are other groups forming, go contact them, but the newsletter is going to be staying more neutral and not pushing initiatives? So these are all of the things that you want to think about when you're kind of putting together your newsletter plan. And yeah, these goals can change and shift over time. So you might start as just yourself And then somebody might come in and say, oh, I like doing this stuff. Can I come in too? People do move in and out of buildings. And so there is going to be a fluctuation of interest in being active in it. So, yeah, being open to what the goals are based on who is working on it and who is in the building is really important. Frequency. My one like firm suggestion I think I would ever put in this presentation is try to do a newsletter every month. Once a month is a good minimum and maximum, honestly, for this kind of stuff, uh, barring special editions. And there's that note. Special editions can't be distributed on an as needed basis. For instance, if there's a big community meeting coming up because of a thing, for instance, redevelopment or something being sold, or major maintenance stuff going on, maybe there's a reason to have a special bulletin. But honestly, every once a month is a good pace for a resident newsletter. It's just kind of like, people are paying their rent every month, people are moving in and out at once a month. So it's a good way to keep people up to date and aware that there's a good community. At the same time, if you don't have that capacity, doing one every 3 or 4 months is also a great schedule, because we have, quarterly or seasonal options in that way. And it still has that activity. You might want to put more information, right? And maybe doing 2 pages instead of 1 if you're doing it on a quarterly basis. So yeah, again, frequency of publication is very much based on you and your circumstances. But once a month really is like the ideal circumstance if you can do it. Tone and style. So this is one of the things that I like to get some information, or I like to get some feedback on. I've been talking a lot, and tone and style is very varied when it comes to people and how we take in information. So each community is going to be a very different environment. Some I happen to live in a multi-generational apartment building. It's a walk up though, no elevators. It's a smaller building, and it's that has a certain feel about it, a certain vibe. And so the newsletter that I write, it fits with that tone. Another group might live at a retirement home, a retirement facility. And so that is a different tone. They're going to have different information and different, demographics. So I'm interested in hearing, are there different like community newsletters? Are there any kind of ideas bubble up from the audience? And yeah, you don't have to say anything, but if there is anything, I'd love to hear any ideas.
I work with a lot of elders because I'm working with the Elder Renter Council and so with several elder buildings. And something that is very important to elder communities that I haven't observed as much in multifamily communities is the community events portion. They really want to know when they can get together, whether it's for a movie night or a potluck. So those types of things are what keep elders engaged. It's not that folks in multifamily buildings don't like those things, but they're not held to the same level of priority that elders want them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and is there anybody in this room that can think about like, how would you be interested in getting information from your neighbors? Would you be interested in uh, reading a newsletter like this? So you don't have to answer that now, because the next slide goes into the types of content. And this is where people have lots of ideas. And this is where you get people excited to get involved. So once you have sort of your idea, your spurring on this project, then you get to do content every month. And it might seem overwhelming at first, but you'll soon find that there's all kinds of information and you have too much often, and you have to like cut stuff out that you really wanted to get in there that month. So once you start publishing a newsletter, people start telling you about stuff because they want their information to be shared with other people. And so, these are just a few types of, content, but, announcements and events, as Kate was saying, in elder communities, a lot of times there's lots of community events versus in a lot of other multifamily housing type stuff, there's not as much. Maintenance and safety tips, always good for even renters because, we're still dealing with plumbing issues and electrical issues. And so, and we don't often get good advice because a lot of the stuff out there is geared towards people who have single homes or who own places. So it's a really good opportunity to share how to, improve your renter situation. Featuring residents, neighbors, local businesses, right? Do you, like I said earlier, do you want to have people content? I did a pet feature. People wrote in about their pet for a couple of months, and we shared. We have a lot of cats in our building. That's what we discovered. We're a building of cats, and we like that. And community news and updates goes on with events and news, but like it's different because events and announcements tend to be internal versus community news updates external, right? Are there plays? Are anybody in the building involved in anything in the community that they want to share? And then last thing, lifestyle content. Recipes are a great thing. We always had a recipe at the end of our newsletter because one resident just always wanted to share a recipe. And so we always had that as a piece of content. And so, yeah, that's a really great way to get people, if they have one thing that they want to share with their community, there you go. There's a way to connect people. So any other ideas about content or things that you think that you would want to see or share with your neighbors with your community? No ideas?
I think talking about like issues in the building, as long as it's not too action oriented, at least in the beginning. Simple things like where's the community room gone and when can we get it back? How the washing machine been down? Seems like it's been a really long time. Is anyone else struggling with this? It are kind of like the tiptoe into potentially organizing that could be included.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, exactly, and that's one of the things I'm glad you brought that up. Community news and updates is a maintenance and safety tips, right? These are subtle ways of saying like you can talk about things that are relevant to getting people excited about organizing, right? Laundry, the laundry room is often a great organizing point in a building because everybody can empathize with each other on how crappy it is when two of the machines are down and you still have, a coin system when all the other buildings around you are getting, card systems and all this stuff. I might be speaking from a personal experience. I cannot say legitimately or not, but these are situations that happen all over the place. So it's not a unique situation at all. And so yeah, having those kinds of discussions in a community newsletter are a great way to get people aware of the power that they have when they start to come together around one thing, one issue. Starts with the laundry room, and then, we take over the boards. So, feedback and evaluation. This is, after all, for the community, right? So, when we take on projects, I like doing newsletters personally. That's why I'm giving this presentation because I did this. I put together a newsletter during the pandemic for me, for fun. At the same time, I really did ask my neighbors, what is it that you want to see? Because while putting together the newsletter is fun for me, I know the real reason is to make sure that my neighbors are interested in reading it. So there's always a good feedback and evaluation part of these kinds of projects. We want to make sure that we're having fun with it and that we're being informative. So yeah, encourage feedback and add an email address. You don't have to use your own, right? It's super easy to just create a new email address that you can forward to your personal address and have a, you know, newsletter or an apartment email address. So, you know, asking for feedback is another way to get people interested in getting involved in the situation. And it also helps potentially people practice speaking up, because if they're talking to you, maybe that will take away some of the fear that they have calling the main office about an issue, right? So all of these things are things to think about when it comes to organizing when in newsletters. And that's the thing about this um, workshop, this particular presentation. It's not just about creating a newsletter. It's about creating a newsletter for organizing. And we are using a newsletter, and as I said, it can be a neutral information sharing vehicle. But we're here in this meeting, we're discussing it from an organizing perspective. So keeping that in mind as we're putting together the project is a really important part of the puzzle. And we come to the end. So what did we learn? Tenant newsletters, great way to organize people, build a sense of community, encourage feedback, incorporate feedback, right? All of this stuff that I just said about making the newsletter yours and the communities at the same time, because that's what we're doing here. Organizing is about building community, and hopefully this is a good way for you to do that. So good luck and thank you. Any questions or comments?
I have a question.
Yeah.
What role, if any, does management play in this? Because certainly if they, they'll see you are putting out this newsletter, and it would be helpful for them to be like, hey, FYI, and then like there's some maintenance thing that folks could know about. But also it's not your job to disseminate information from management, and you certainly don't want them like controlling the content. So like, how do you set boundaries and draw the line there?
Great question. And I sometimes feel like I'm a broken record, but it really does depend on the particular community you're a part of. And I say that because you're right, including management information for management can be a good thing, because we want to make sure that our neighbors are aware of everything that's going on in the community, and that includes updates from management. And yet we don't want them to think that it's this is a way for them to get out of their responsibilities for informing the community about things that they have to do it in a legal way. So I would say talk to each other, and don't put in things. Okay. I've not personally had this issue. So if there's somebody that has other thoughts on this, I would very much welcome you to speak up. And I would just like to say that, like, from my perspective, not accepting submissions from management, but putting information that you become aware of about what is going on with management into the newsletter is a good way to make sure that that line isn't crossed. Any other ideas or questions?
What about as people come to you with submission ideas, what if someone brings something that is like controversial or potentially goes against your values? I'm thinking specifically like we've organized in buildings where there's a lot of like really like horrible things said about the unhoused neighbors in the community, and suggestions on how to negotiate that. How do you make sure that the tenants feel like they have a voice, without getting these like ideas spread that could be harmful?
That's a very important role for an editor position. And that's a really important thing to discuss with, again, the people who are working on the newsletter and the people who live in your community. So from my perspective, in my building, because and we have had discussions like this in mine. So I will speak from personal experience this time that we, as a group, have come to it's become aware that the majority stands for standing up for the unhoused, standing up for the more vulnerable, and that bullying, marginalized in any capacity, isn't going to be accepted. And so that was a conversation, though, that has happened in other places in our building and in our community, not necessarily in the newsletter. So that's one of those issues that is related to the newsletter and bigger than as well. And that's one of the things about this newsletter project is it fits into the organizing work. It's one piece and it's a tool, but it can't be the end all be all, because there still have to be discussions. You still have to have connection points with others on these things. Now, back to your question in terms of when somebody submits something and maybe, you don't have any idea, you haven't had these discussions as a community yet. This is one of those places, this is one of those opportunities that shows that this conversation needs to happen in the community. So from my perspective, if you, for instance, Kate, are putting together this newsletter and you personally have a stance that says we should support the unhoused and not, crap on them in our work, and you get a letter submission saying the opposite, you're going to have, this conflict now. At the same time, somebody in another community isn't going to have that same conflict potentially, and so the letter might just get printed. Then you as a resident then have the opportunity to write in and start the conversation in that way. So the newsletter project is another way that you see the kind of community you live in and whether or not that is a community you want to be a part of or not sometimes. As I said earlier with the, informing the landlord about newsletter, your rights, it could be good and bad. That same thing is about, the resident. Not everybody's going to appreciate the tone that you take. And while you should listen to feedback, you do want to make sure that you're not catering to the one person, or you're not letting the minority try and dictate something for the majority. So this is one of those complicated questions that we often have in organizing circles, not just in this topic, but in newsletters, but in all kinds of topics. And so I would say, again, this is another thing about from the group perspective is like, have you had these kinds of conversations with neighbors, and have they gone well? And in what way have they gone well, or what way have they not gone well? So yeah, that seems like a very long answer.
I have a bunch more questions, but we have other participants here, and I just want to make sure that there's space for folks to chime in. Okay, it's very quiet. I'm going to ask another question, but keep
Hi,
thinking
I
of
have a
questions.
question.
Oh, okay.
Hey,
Hi.
so we're just talk about like the hypothetical situation of a landlord property manager who is a bully and doesn't like it when residents interact with one another. Are there restrictions on where a person can post up newsletters without management take being allowed to take them back down if they're spotted? Do you know?
Uh, you're allowed to interact with your neighbors. You're allowed to inform your neighbors. If you know you have a hostile manager, I would suggest folding them up in thirds and slipping them under doors. It's the best way to make sure that they get into the building or into the unit and nobody knows. Um, I've I've they're supposed to have a public uh, notification board. So, and I'm not sure about the exact rules, and I meant to look this up before this workshop because I knew this question was going to come up, and oh, bad me. But you're allowed to communicate with your neighbors, and you're allowed to put information in public locations, and so management has to tell you where those locations are. They're not allowed to stop you from communicating. So whether it's on a door with blue sticky tape, because they can put restrictions as well, right? They can say you're not allowed to damage things. So here is a list of things you're allowed to use to put things up. So I just always have a stack of blue sticky tape. Just always have blue painter's tape, or actually painter's tape. That you don't have to have. It's not even blue. There's many colors now. It's in multicolor painter tape. It's fabulous. Have a rainbow painter's tape available to you, and that's almost always allowed. Like if they complain, you can take a picture and show it to whoever administrative person and be like, I use painter's tape, it's fine, and that'll be fine. So yeah, these are some ways I would say though, fold in
Okay,
thirds, slip it under the door. If
because
you have a
yeah,
hostile manager.
the hypothetical hostile manager has locked up the community bulletin board with a deadbolt that we cannot access anymore. So yeah, doors are probably the best way to go in this case, is what you're
Mm-hmm.
telling me. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
I
Hey,
wanted
I
to
see a
point
hand
out
up.
that there's also a legal protection around posting notices on doors. If your manager is taking them down, that is breaking City of Seattle law. And if you're in a low income HUD funded building, it's also a HUD rule. So it's double not allowed. So you can contact us and we'll advocate for you, or you can go directly to SDCI because it's violating a landlord tenant law. You have a right. If they tell you you don't, you can push back on that. You also I don't think they're required to have a community bulletin board, but if they have one, you have a right to post on there.
Yeah.
You can also hand them out in the lobby, but depending on their rules, they might not let you post them there specifically. But as far as the bulletin board and the doors, legally protected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's what I said. I wanted to make it clear. They have to tell you where you're allowed to post things. They can tell you, you can't post things in certain places, but if you ask them, I want to post this thing, you can even say for, like, I don't know, like a yard sale. You're having a little sale. You want to just tell your neighbors about it. They have to tell you where you can post it. And so once you have that information, you can then use it for a future meets and all that stuff. So yeah, they might tell you one place, obscure place, but then that also is a way for you to show, some administrative law person that they're trying to make it hard for you to do stuff. So this is one of the reasons why communicating with your management, especially hostile management, and keeping a record of this kind of stuff is really effective. And something innocuous like, wanting to put a newsletter out to your neighbors is something that, a that's going to be more on your side than the landlord. So yeah, it's a good way to test the waters of how hostile your management could possibly be. Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions or ideas come up for today? Anybody have any, interest in doing something like this for the community, even if it's not like a paper newsletter? Like I said, like earlier, people think paper, right? But you can also put up a little website, just, easy blog post or a Discord group. Um, Mastodon is now a thing. There's lots of ways to communicate with your neighbors, and sometimes it's best to use multiple forms of communication. So while we have a monthly-ish newsletter, it waxes and wanes depending on our bandwidth as a community. But we do also have a Discord, and that is 24/7. And that's a it's a good resource for when loud bangs are happening in the neighborhood, and we want to know, is there something to be worried about, or we have construction plans going on, and so it's a really good resource to talk about just the average things going on in your community. So newsletters, great resource, as are Discord groups and other tools of communication. Yeah.
I have a really basic question. We're talking about a one pager, and folks like me, I tend to be a little verbose and go on and on. So how many different topics do you generally include, and what size font do you use?
That's a really great question. So my newsletters were very, I guess, traditional looking in that they had 3 columns, or they had a half pager at the bottom. And so that made me have to be very succinct. And we tend to have different sections. So as I said, we had somebody always submitted a recipe, and that recipe could be sized bigger or smaller based on the amount of text we had that month. So that's a great thing about designing newsletters. You can fiddle with stuff. But yeah, generally I tried to keep things to notices about 15 to 20 words, and informational articles about 75 words, maybe 100. So it's very succinct. You're not writing, essays here. You're really getting the bullet point information that people want to, to help people find more information about a topic. So I would say we had anywhere from 3 to 5 topics per issue. And one of those topics was almost always apartment updates, stuff going on in community roots housing, and in at the time we also had a COVID column. So that was, back in 2020, it was changing on a monthly basis, if not more sooner. So having a regular column for that information was really important to the community. That goes to show, sometimes, right, a topic might come up and you might have a lot of information, and you can have a series month for a while, for the whole year, about a topic, so you don't have to contain it to just one issue.
What program do you use to create your newsletters?
I use LibreOffice and Paint.net. Yeah, open source all the way. Canva is also a really great resource. I actually use it for this presentation, so I'm not against great commercial stuff. But honestly, I found it really great to just create a Word document or LibreDoc and type it in and print it out, and just keeping the format. Like I said, I tried to keep the print copy very similarly looking every month. And so there were basically 3 columns and text in those columns, and they changed sizes a little bit, but I kept it in there, and that made it easy for me to update it and not have to worry about the design every month. Yeah.
So it sounds like when you speak of 3 columns and 1 sheet that you're talking about just the front of a piece of paper, or were you using both sides?
I was using both sides actually, yeah. So 3 columns, 1 sheet, 2-sided. And on the opposite side, as I was saying, we often had a recipe, and that one we took up, it was like a half page. So the bottom half would, and we would make it, like I said, bigger or smaller based on the amount of text we had. So yeah, the 3 columns would, it would usually be like 1 to 2 or 2 to 3 pieces of information on the front, and then 1 to 2 pieces of information on the back.
So since I've lived in my building, I created a Facebook group for the tenants of the building, and I sort of see a Facebook group as being analogous to a newsletter. I guess I'm wondering a bunch of things, and some of this goes off topic a little bit from newsletters, unless you're thinking of Facebook groups as also being newsletters.
I would say they're analogous, yeah.
So one of the things that I've wondered is if I suspect there are a lot of other single building groups out there like mine, but is there anything in the Seattle area that connects tenant leader groups? Like, I mean, I know all of you are doing a really fabulous job because you have these great groups that help us learn more about being a tenant leader and what our rights are and what the laws are. But are there any groups out there where tenants are helping other tenants to distribute newsletters or admin Facebook groups where they can use each other as resources for ideas? Are you aware of any of those kinds of things?
Yeah, well, and that's, I'm immediately thinking of the Seattle Renter Organizing Council, because that's one of the things that we do is every meeting we talk about how we can support each other in our buildings. And so having somebody say, you know, I can use some support in getting newsletters started in my building is something, you know, I could raise my hand for potentially in that group. And so that's, I would say, the best group. If you're in Seattle specifically, the Seattle Renter Organizing Council meeting is the best place to come to organize with fellow leaders for that kind of support.
You all are really helpful, right? Thank you for doing these things.
Thank you for coming.
When I think about asking for help, either as a potential tenant leader or as a tenant with questions, I'm a little bit overwhelmed by going to places like the Seattle Tenants Union or Be Seattle and asking for help for my particular issue. I don't know, I'm not really clear how that works. Like, I mean, I know that you can write in, and if you're being evicted, there are people who will help you. But if I have a question about, like, you know, how do I set up my newsletter in such a way that it absolves the landlord of any kind of affiliation with what I'm saying? You know, what are the legal things I need to do to protect myself and the landlord? I kind of don't know where to go with those kinds of questions, what the process is. Sometimes I feel like, oh my gosh, if I ask this question, it might be months before I get an answer, because certainly they're overwhelmed with more important things than mine. what do I do if I want sort of like one-on-one help with figuring out where my next steps are as a tenant leader, or as someone who has questions about the legality of a lease before I sign it, that might be time sensitive. And I guess I don't have enough sense of how your various programs work or work together to help someone like me.
Totally. And I understand your confusion because I've had often there. And it's just recently, I feel like I'm starting to like get into the inner circle of this leadership, group, whatever that you say that we're, but we all started in a kind of a way that I feel like you are where you are. And so welcome. Showing up here is the kind of the first step of being a part of that. And I do want to say, in terms of the Seattle Renter Organizing Council, that is made up of just renters, like fellow renters. So that is the peer-to-peer place. It's hosted by or supported by the Seattle and Tenants Union, but it's really run by the people who come, and we determine what we talk about, and we determine how we want to support each other in that way. And so that's why I'm saying that's a really great place to get this one-to-one support that you're asking for, because we do have time often during the meeting to take breaks and chat with each other about stuff that's going on in our buildings. And we have a time during the meeting to just talk about, stuff that is going on in our building and how can we support each other. So yeah, I see Kate's hands up.
I just wanted to note the reason that this kind of came together in the first place was because Be Seattle, and especially the Tenants Union, didn't have capacity to be in every single building that needed this. But there were like a lot of buildings going through the same issues, or tenant leaders who had the same questions. And some of the more experienced leaders were experts. They have as much knowledge as I do as an organizer because they've lived it already. And they're coming in. So this is definitely a place where you can come in and be like, I know this is a silly question, or even, I just wanted to connect with somebody who is in this space, because I know people said that like they'll call the tenants union and call 15 times and not get someone. They only have a few people on the hotline at a time. So this is also a way to give people access to us, that like we're gonna be there. You can corner us and ask us a question if you need it, but also you are in a room full of renters who are doing the same things. And that's kind of the more important aspect. Like Sonatina's running this workshop. She's not an employee. She's just somebody who stepped up with knowledge to share.
Yeah, and that's why I'm also part of the Renter Council, because I have been that lost person before. And so whenever I see an opportunity to organize and to get together with my fellow, frontline organizer people, I take it as much as possible. And that to me is what this newsletter workshop is all about too, because it's a way to gather and find people, mentors or rec teams that have an interest in this stuff.
Are you aware of any ways that aren't video workshops that people like us are communicating together as a group?
Oh, the in-person, the SROC, we're starting to call it, Seattle Renter Organizing Council. We meet in person once a month.
Right, but I'm asking about methods that aren't in person or online, or I mean in person or a Zoom meeting. I'm talking about like an ongoing conversation with other people who are in similar situations, to trying to organize in their buildings and learn about tenant rights and having ongoing dialogues with each other on a daily basis instead of just once a month.
Well, that's an individual thing, right? Mutual aid groups are often, and the way we find each other is in the larger groups. That's why I feel like I keep coming back to the Seattle Renter Organizing Council, because I know in that larger group, there have already started to have smaller relationships developing, and people are communicating with each other on a much more regular basis than just monthly at the meeting. But those are the smaller relationships that aren't really organized by the bigger group.
Do you know of any tenant rights groups locally that are working specifically on MFTE issues?
Kate? I'm not sure.
I know that Sonatina, you were trying to get a all community roots renter group going, and community roots is all tax credit MFT type units. Maybe we could lend some expertise towards Melissa with that info.
Yeah,
What do you think?
that sounds good. Yeah, I'm not. That's what I'm like. I wasn't quite sure about what your question meant, Melissa.
Well, just that I suspect that my building is not really adhering to a lot of MFTE policies. By my own math, I think that personally, I've been cheated out of maybe even over $10,000 in rent over the last 6 years because they haven't been properly giving me credits for things that are required by our lease, but should be deducted from the total of the MFTE rent and haven't been. So, I mean, I have a personal interest, but as I researched this personally, I realized that there must be so many more people in my same situation in other buildings, in my own building. And I'm just feeling at a loss. I don't feel like I have the ability to take this on to spearhead something like this, but I also haven't found any other groups that have already taken it on. And so I just don't know what to do with the information that I'm getting and how to make people aware of their rights. And I'm sorry, I'm not being very articulate. And that's part of the problem is I feel really passionate about justice. And because of some chronic health issues, I don't have the spoons or the brain power to kind of like handle something like this on a scale that I think it really requires. And so I'm really hungry to learn about other people out there who might be doing something similar so that I don't feel the need to take it all on by myself.
Totally. And I want to thank you for saying all that because you are speaking very much, I think, to everybody here and how we felt and feel. Like we felt that when we started this work, and we probably still feel this because it's a complicated world. And the people who create the systems that we are currently mired in have a very big investment in keeping it complicated. And so that's why I feel it valuable that we do get together and you express that here because it doesn't need to be that complicated. And Kate put in the chat about in terms of your particular situation, because it does involve money and rules in that way, contacting the Tenant Law Center is probably a very good thing. And yeah, you're right that a lot of other people are in this situation and none of us have the capacity to take on the whole system. And that's why we're here organizing together, because every single voice that adds to this side adds that power. And so thank you for showing up. And that's why we keep wanting to encourage you. I really hope to see you at the organizing council meeting because like it really is the group. It's us basically who get together and talk about these issues and give each other the space to let us describe the overwhelm and get support from fellow frontline organizing workers.
I dropped a link to the Tenant Law Center's website in the chat for you, Melissa. The hotline number should be there.
Thank you.
And you had your hand up. Did you want to say something more?
You covered it. I was gonna say Tenant Law Center is person number 3. So no, we're all on the same page here.
Yeah. So my presentation has been concluded for quite a while. This has been a great conversation, but I do want to have the transfer it back over to the organizing team and let you all take it away in whichever way you feel you need to conclude and or not. Keep it going. I don't know.
Sorry about that. I was in our new resource guide, and I want to copy paste something in here. There's also the King County tenant resource line, which is newer. It's not quite, it doesn't specifically list MFTE units, but it's a project. It's staffed by a partnership with the Tenant Law Center, the Housing Justice Project, and the Tenants Union. So even though it's not like quite specifically how they describe it, this might be another resource. So I want to put it in here, and I'll drop the phone number in just a second. But it's brand new. It just started like a month ago. So it didn't come to mind as like the first idea. Okay, so let's jump back into the action part. So at every workshop, we like to take an action that you can do right now. So we've got a couple tonight that'll just take a few seconds to advocate for your fellow renters. So the first one, the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance requests that we take action for affordable housing today by demanding lawmakers to pass the Affordable Homes Act. This measure would create a new tax on large real estate transactions of $5 million or more to fund affordable housing. The Affordable Homes Act, House Bill 1628, will create a permanent fund source for the state and a fund source for local communities to build the affordable homes we need. It does this by taxing those who can afford it, beneficiaries of multi-million-dollar real estate transactions. It is equitable and targets the resources to the communities that need it most: people experiencing homelessness, people with intellectual or developmental disabilities, and low-income households. So we will drop a link in the chat, and if you are watching this online, you can scan the QR code to just send a quick letter in support of House Bill 1628. Additionally, we need your help securing a proviso proposed by Representative Frank Chop and Senators Joe Nguyen and Rebecca Saldana. This proposed approximately $900,000 would help cover startup costs for the Seattle social housing developer. House Our Neighbors has created an action alert with a template that can be sent to all 18 state legislators that represent Seattle. So please just take a few seconds to send a letter now. And so this is just a quick way to ensure that social housing is able to thrive in Seattle, as while it did pass, it is not fully funded yet. So we need this money to get it off the ground. And is there anything else that we should cover before we end this meeting? Those were the only two things that we had left. Okay. Well, thank you all so much for coming, and thank you, Sanatina, for that really informative and interesting presentation. And I have a building that I've been working in that I think they should definitely start a newsletter. And I'm gonna pass them this presentation. Okay, well, everyone, have a great evening.